Hello, my name is Catherine Simone, and welcome to Introduction to Machine Learning. This is Computer Science 480 held with 680, taught at the University of Waterloo in fall 2024. This is lecture 0, which is sort of the introduction to the course. Okay, so I'll be your instructor for the course, and so I'll start off with a little bit about who I am. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Sheridan School of Computer Science here at the University of Waterloo, and a member of the Center for Theoretical Neuroscience. And so for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of working under Professor Jeff Orchard, one of the math faculty here, as well as Terry Stewart, who is a research officer at the National Research Council of Canada, and specifically the NRC UW Digital Technologies Collaboration Center. And so in terms of what we actually do, our ultimate goal is really to understand how brains work well enough that we could actually go and specify the algorithms that allow animals to not only survive, but thrive in their environments. And so what that means is that we look at the architectures of real neural circuits in insects, fish, mammals, whatever, and then interpret them within the rich computational frameworks that machine learning has to offer. Occasionally this gets very exciting because the algorithms that have been invented so far can't account for the data, or it's not clear how a biological system could even do that. And so we'll have to go and refine or develop a new algorithm to try and close that gap. And so it's in this process that we gain some real high-level insight into how nature might have solved some very hard computational problems that relate to energy efficiency, scalability, robustness, things that continue to be of great concern to the field of ML today. And so we'll also then evaluate these biologically inspired algorithms against the traditional ones to see if and where nature has an edge over the state of the art. And so in terms of how I got here, my undergraduate education was in electrical engineering, which I did at Memorial University of Newfoundland. I did my master's in biomedical engineering at the University of Calgary, where I specialized in instrumentation for neural recording interfaces, before ultimately finding my place right at that intersection of computational and systems neuroscience for my doctoral studies. My PhD thesis focused on discerning the information that is represented by the mammalian hypothalamus, specifically the part responsible for launching the body's response to stress. And so I got to play with tons of data and machine learning methods to try and discern some meaning about what the algorithms of this part of the brain are carrying out. So following these questions has taken me to some beautiful places and given me the chance to work with some amazing people, specifically those in the neuromorphic engineering community. So this picture was taken from the Telluride Neuromorphic Cognition Engineering workshop that I had the pleasure of attending over the summer. This workshop brought together researchers from all over the world to a small town in the Colorado Rockies for 3 weeks to do nothing but collaborate on new brain-inspired hardware and algorithms for AI. And so while it was amazing to get to work with people from academia, industry, and government, what I really appreciated was just how much this group of people loves to challenge their limits in every area of their lives. This picture, for example, was taken during a 22-kilometer hike where we gained over 1,100 meters in elevation. I turn on the pen here. Say 1,100 meters of elevation. And then we were already at 9,000 feet above sea level and gasping for air, and almost got chased off the mountain by a thunderstorm. But this group of people just kept on trucking through all of those challenges, and it was just really a testament to how much they persevered despite how hard brain modeling and neuromorphic engineering can be. But outside of work, I like to hang out with my 3 cats, and I live to get out and enjoy nature. I love hiking, biking, running, all that stuff. And I've gotten really into bouldering this last year, so you might find me hanging out at one of the Grand River Rocks gyms pretty often this term. All right, so now that you know who I am, for the rest of the lecture, we'll go over what you can expect from the course. So we'll start off with basic logistical information you need to get started. After that, we'll go into our high-level goals for the course, and then we'll get more granular about what exactly the course will cover. So here we'll define what it is that we mean by ML, machine learning, and a rough schedule for the course. We'll finally, we'll close out with a quick summary and a preview for next lecture. All right, so logistics. So this course has 2 sections, both of which will meet twice a week for an hour and 20 minutes. An important thing to note is that, at least at this time, it's not my plan to record what happens in the classroom, but I am making video recordings of the lecture portions themselves, and this is why. So all this will be on YouTube. So information about the course will then be hosted on 3 websites. So all of the logistical matters are affirmed in the syllabus, which is hosted on the course homepage. It's linked here. So the course homepage will provide materials to supplement what we covered in class, the lecture slides, as well as links to readings or other resources. And this is also where the assignments will be posted. We'll be using Piazza then for discussion about the course, as well as to make announcements. For example, when new assignments are up or new materials become available for you to review. You can use this to ask questions to see if someone else in the class has an answer. And if not, someone from the instructional team will respond. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to go and sign up for that, as announcements will start coming over the next few days. So the Learn shell will really only be used to submit your assignments and access your grades. So don't go there if you're looking for materials for the course. So in terms of who's in this learning community, this is a popular course as far as courses in upper year undergraduate education tend to go. It's attracted almost 160 students between the 2 sections. There's also a dozen or so graduate students on the wait list, and a few interested in auditing the courses. So this is great because there's a wealth of different perspectives that you'll be able to draw on to help you master the concepts we're covering. Also, as your instructor, my highest priority is to support your learning experience. So if you want to meet with me, just find an available spot in my calendar and send me an email with a meeting request. We can do in person or over Zoom, one-on-one, or if you want to come as a small group, that's all fine. I've blocked off Tuesday and Thursday completely for this, so anytime outside of those class hours on those days is great. We've also got a fantastic instructional team. These are experts in machine learning in their own right. I've listed the rest of the team here, many of whom have TA'd for this specific course before or have taken it under my one of my predecessors. Each TA will be taking on one of the assignments and will be having their own office hours that will announce around the date that the assignment is posted. Aveline will also be serving as the point of contact for the CS 680 project, as well as helping out to guide the discussion on Piazza. Okay, so in terms of a textbook, this course has no required textbook. And so instead, similarly to how Professor Gautam Kamath approached this course in previous years, I'm going to link materials from the course homepage, either readings or other resources, which might come from several different books or sources to supplement what we cover in class. The readings will be drawn most often from these texts listed here, which are freely available online. For example, Introduction to Statistical Learning by James et al., Elements of Statistical Learning by Hastie et al., Understanding Machine Learning from Theory to Algorithms by Shai Shalev-Swartz and Shai David, the latter of which is actually a faculty member here at the University of Waterloo, as well as Deep Learning by Goodfellow, Bengio, and Corville, and finally Dive into Deep Learning by John et al. So a few of you have already reached out to ask how you can best prepare for the course. And so while the official course prerequisites, which are algorithms, CS 341, and one of the statistics courses that I've listed here, going by the university calendar alone, I don't think will position you with the reality of what's needed to get the most out of the course. And so specifically, we'll be exploring both the mathematical theories underlying a wide range of machine learning algorithms, as well as implementing these algorithms from scratch. And so taking on these challenges, you'll really want to have in your cognitive toolbox foundational concepts in linear algebra, things like inner products, norms, and matrix properties, as well as those from calculus, such as partial derivatives. Also, you'll need to be comfortable with the Python programming language because we'll be using this for assignments. Um, and so I say this not to scare anyone away, but to give you a heads up that if you find yourself struggling, you might just need to back up and review some of these concepts that you would have encountered earlier in degree program. That being said, I recognize that a lot of you might not have seen this material in quite some time, particularly those in the graduate course. You folks have followed very different paths to get to where you are today. So I'll always try my best to communicate the picture I have in my head about what's going on and spell out the natural language meaning of the math. Okay, so moving on in terms of the workload. On top of the lectures, of which we'll have another 21 after this one here, there will be 4 assignments that'll come out roughly every 2 or 3 weeks. So as I alluded to earlier, these will be Python programming assignments and may also involve writing up derivations or proofs, which will be typesets, using MathJax and the Jupyter Notebook that you submit. So you're very encouraged to work together, but I do need everyone to write and submit their own assignment. I'll actually be posting the first assignment early next week to help get you thinking about what we'll cover as the month unfolds. And like I said, these will be submitted on CrowdMark and Learn. There will also be a midterm during class time and a final exam, which will cover the whole course. These will focus more on testing your understanding of the fundamental concepts. My aim here is not to motivate you to memorize the material, but rather to push you to get that deep understanding that I know you want. So you'll be able to make and take with you into the exam a handwritten cheat sheet on standard letter size paper. In alignment with Professor Gabson Kenneth's approach to the course, graduate students in CS 680 will also pursue a project. So if you have a lot of, so here you have a lot of freedom to shape this component to support your research or pursue your interests. So the project could involve trying to improve on the state-of-the-art performance on a data set, applying an ML algorithm to another field, developing a new algorithm, conducting a theoretical analysis of an existing algorithm, or even a survey on an emerging topic in the field. There are some restrictions, of course. The project needs to be related to machine learning, and ideally should be a path for you to learn something new and interesting to you. So you can use this time to take a risk to go for something substantial enough to be accepted into a top machine learning conference, like ICML, NeurIPS, or AAAI, things like that. You can work in groups of up to 2 for this project if you like. And in fact, we're using Piazza to find other students in the class that you might like to team up with. So graduate students will be submitting a short pitch in a few weeks' time, specifically due on September 19th. So this will be 3 to 4 sentences long. Even if you don't team up, you can also use this to get feedback on your idea from others in the class. Your proposal for the project, which will be 2 to 4 pages, excluding references, will then be due on October 8th, and the final report on the last day of classes, December 3rd. For more details on this, please go and look at the syllabus. Okay. All right, so course policies. Like I said before, you must do your own assignment. Discussing the assignments with others is fine, and in fact, we really encourage you to do this, but copying code from others would be considered plagiarism. The same goes for the use of generative AI, including but not limited to ChatGPT, Copilot, and Gemini. So those tools, while they definitely have a place in your learning, they're not to be used for the assignments. If you need help with the assignments, please make use of the TAs. They're there to help you and really excited to help you. And so for office hours, I recognize that as upper year undergrads and graduate students, you're all busy and have very different schedules. And so to be flexible there, you can meet with me by email appointment. Just check my calendar and send me an email to request a meeting. Like I said before, TAs will be hosting their own office hours closer to when assignments are due. The instructional team also recognizes that life happens, And so you might find yourself having made much less progress towards an assignment than you were hoping, maybe at some point this semester. And so if and when that happens, just email the TA for that assignment and copy me to request a 48-hour extension for the assignment. We won't necessarily respond to your email, but you'll see your deadline updated in Learn. An important thing to add here is that we need you to email the TA 48 hours before the deadline. So that's also affirmed in the syllabus. So you can do this twice this semester, no questions asked, but anything after that will require documentation of a valid reason for the short-term absence. Regrade requests. Yeah, so if you think we made a mistake with your grade, you can request a regrade within 1 week of your grade having been returned. To do so, email the TA for the assignment and copy me and explain where you think the error was. We'll review your case. As for communication, like I said, we'll be using Piazza for discussion about the course content. Questions about the concepts we covered, and confusion about assignments, things like that. Logistical matters like meetings and extension requests should go through email. And as for email, I'll try to get back to you within 24 hours, but that is 8 working hours. And so if you email me on Monday afternoon, I'll have gotten back to you by Tuesday afternoon. But if you email me over the weekend, then I'll also get back to you on Monday. Okay, so this is YouTube, so there's no questions. Moving on, that was all logistics and admin, but now we get into the fun part of what we're going to do. And so I don't know how else to start this, but I'll just make the most obvious statement ever. Machine learning is just everywhere, and I'd be willing to bet that an ML algorithm has certainly touched every corner of your everyday life. And I'd be willing to bet that an ML algorithm has influenced your life already today. So here are just a few examples. So there's personalized ML algorithms are used for personalized recommendations, leveraged by services such as Netflix, YouTube, and Amazon. Here, machine learning algorithms analyze your viewing, searching, and purchase history to recommend movies, products, videos. These recommendation systems use collaborative filtering, content-based filtering, maybe even deep learning techniques to predict what you might like next. And the idea is that this could enhance your experience on these platforms. Voice assistants like Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, voice recognition and natural language processing are also powered by machine learning. And so these assistants learn from your voice patterns, preferences, as well as frequent commands. And the idea is that this can provide a more accurate responses and personal suggestions. So hopefully your interactions will be a bit more seamless over time. Email spam filtering. Yeah, if you've used Gmail or Outlook today, then you've probably taken advantage of that. So machine learning models can classify incoming emails to filter out spam and phishing attempts, as well as to categorize images, for example, in your primary inbox or to social or promotions. And then, yeah, social media content curation. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, social media platforms will use machine learning to curate your feed. And they'll show you content that's tailored to your interests based on the engagement patterns that you've had in the past, like likes or shares or comments. Finally, for navigation and traffic predictions, such as with Google Maps or Waze. So machine learning is crucial in analyzing real-time data from users, traffic cameras, historical data to predict traffic conditions, estimate arrival times, and also suggest the fastest route for you to get to where you need to be. So these services continually learn and improve predictions, hopefully offering more reliable navigation over time. And so while we know that this is everywhere, it can still feel a bit like magic, right? Like in this XKCD comic on the right. Machine learning algorithms might feel a bit like a black box where, some complicated stuff happens and supposedly some math happens and we get some answer. And so if you find yourself in that camp, um, and you don't have a principled way of guiding your work, you're restricted really to trial and error and the frustration of not knowing why your model isn't learning, or just as concerningly, when it suddenly starts learning. And so while it might look like a mysterious process, it's crucial to understand what's happening inside the black box to make informed decisions and improve model performance systematically rather than randomly. And so in this course, we'll discover the mathematical underpinnings of these algorithms. Um, we'll also see that making improvements to models is totally normal. And machine learning is an iterative process involving experimentation, adjustments, and refinements, but that there are right ways and wrong ways to do this. And so while thinking about what you might be able to learn from this course, I started getting emails from students really eager to start, and I started to notice a few patterns. Specifically, there were those that have had work terms or internships at big tech companies and have already explored many applications in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And they were hoping to get some theoretical grounding. And so on the other side, I was hearing from students who had a really strong math background, and they were keen to see how that background could be applied to this new field. And so I've been calling these two kind of the practitioners and the theorists, respectively. And so this at least creates the possibility that there might be some people who aren't too comfortable with either the theory or the implementation. And at the totally other end of the spectrum, those that might have quite a bit of experience with both. We might call these the novices and the wizards, respectively. And so what I think is great about this course is that I really think there is something for everyone. We'll be covering a wide array of algorithms, some of which you might have seen before, some of which you probably haven't. But crucially, we'll be bridging theory and applications. So we'll all be able to move into the top right-hand corner of this chart. And on the note, if you do find yourself in the top right, as I suspect might be some of you in the graduate course, I think you can still push yourself to deepen your knowledge. Answer questions on Piazza, and help provide insight for assignments. And if you find yourself here and you don't feel challenged, please reach out and we can have a chat. Okay, so sometimes the intended learning outcomes as listed in the university calendar can be a bit abstract and difficult to get your head around. It's hard to imagine how you might be different in a few months' time than you are today. And so in this case, I'd like to bring it back to a very tangible example of, maybe you had a work term at a big tech company, and perhaps you were part of the team at some point in the past. What would that experience have looked like if instead you had already taken this course? So let's think about it with that frame in mind. So what would it mean to be able to recognize and formulate a task as an ML problem? So the idea here is really to change how you think about problems, to view them with another lens. So for example, if that tech company you worked at was developing a new feature for a smart assistant product, like enhancing its voice recognition capabilities, maybe you saw the task simply as improve voice recognition. And so you had to rely heavily on like existing code bases or approaches without really understanding why some work better than others. And so the hope here is that after this course, you'd be better positioned to formulate the task into specific ML subproblems like classification and sequence modeling. And so this would help you communicate better with your team. You'd be able to set more accurate project goals, and frame the task clearly from the start. So this would avoid misalignment and wasted effort. Identify and recommend suitable algorithms to tackle different ML problems. And so to return to the internship example on the voice recognition project, perhaps you found yourself defaulting to using algorithms that were familiar or, the team had previously used but didn't have a really strong rationale for. And so you didn't even consider newer or more suitable approaches. And so in a few months' time, the idea is that you'd be in a position to evaluate whether to use things like neural networks or state space-based models on this project. You might even be able to go further and recommend using specific architectures based on the constraints of your project. Implement foundational ML algorithms. Why does that matter? So perhaps in an internship in the past, your role was largely limited to integrating or testing pre-built solutions, and you had to rely on other team members for implementation. And so the expectation is that this course will give you the experience so you could contribute directly by coding core algorithms or optimizing existing ones. And so this would help the team make faster progress and solve issues faster when they do come up. Apply and evaluate ML algorithms on real data sets. So perhaps you struggle to set up proper and comprehensive evaluations, or fail to spot issues with overfitting or biased data sets. So your models might perform poorly in real-world scenarios. And so this course will give you the tools to conduct robust evaluations, tweak hyperparameters, and refine models to improve performance iteratively in a way that adheres to industry best practices. Justify and critique choices in terms of ML principles. So the goal here is to get you to a point where you can articulate the reasons behind choosing specific algorithms. You'd be able to critique suggestions from others and help to refine the models based on sound principles. So without this, decision-making would be more ad hoc. And so if something goes wrong, you might not be able to defend this choice to your superiors. Describe an ethical and safety issues of ML on society. So to go back to our voice recognition internship scenario, this might mean that you proactively raise concerns about things like data privacy, the impact of biased models on user experience, and potential misuses of data. So this might motivate you to implement safeguards like anonymization techniques or fairness checks to align product development with companies' ethical standards and expectations of the public. And so ultimately, I'm hoping that this course would have been able to transform your experience or would position your experience to be transformed from perhaps simply executing that tasks that you've been assigned to becoming more of an active shaper of the project's direction and making informed decisions. So this means you could work more independently, perhaps move into management roles, and be an advocate for responsible AI practices within the team and the field. Okay, so now that we've established our goals for the course, what specifically will we do to try and achieve it? And so it's useful at this point to first define how we'll be thinking about machine learning. And so I'll be using a framing that I first heard about machine learning from my boss, Terry Stewart, in his Fundamentals of AI course, which I thought was just great and really gets at the generality that I think we need. So I'm going to use it here as well. So we'll start off with thinking about machine learning in very general terms as function approximation. And so what I mean by function approximation is that we have some input X, which is usually our data set, and we're going to feed that into a black box, or I guess in this case, it's a gray box, and get some output that we call Y, which is often meaningful or insightful in some way. And so if we've got a system that does that, the black box is computing some sort of function of X. It might not be a smooth function. It might be a very strange and complicated function, but it's a function. And so with a lot of machine learning, we want that box to do something, but we couldn't precisely specify what that function is. Instead, we might have some examples of inputs and outputs. For example, for this set of inputs, this is the output. Or for this set of inputs, give me one output, and for another set of inputs, give me an output. Or even just here's a bunch of inputs and give me an output that tells me something about those inputs. So these examples often are training data, act as constraints on the function that ultimately ends up getting computed. But crucially, we want what's going on inside the generalized inputs that we haven't shown it before. That is, we don't want a function that gets learned to be something trivial like a lookup table, let alone this idea that it wouldn't scale well at all to handle the size of today's data sets, as we would need a lookup table as big as our data set in order to accomplish this task. It also wouldn't generalize to new data. So if we gave it an example X and it gave us Y, we'd want to be able to feed it something arbitrary close to X and get out Y or something close to Y. So if we take that as how we think about machine learning, that is function approximation given previous examples, then we can see how it fits into the larger field of artificial intelligence. Clearly, as depicted in this SMBC comic on the left, there's a lot more to achieving artificial intelligence than simply acting on trends from historical data. AI subfields include research into reasoning, problem-solving, decision-making, planning, natural language processing, and computer vision, and also include approaches like reinforcement learning, the latter of which is actually outside the scope of this course in particular. We can also now position deep learning within machine learning as it is a useful tool for function approximation. So here, for example, we have multiple layers of neurons in between the input X and output Y that each serve an intermediate role in the ultimate function that is approximated. Essentially, these things enable highly complex functions to be approximated by learning a more useful representation of the data in addition to the function being approximated. To provide an example from my own field, this image here is a study conducted by Bonino et al. And what they did was train a deep network to path integrate, that is, to keep track of its position only given velocity information. And so what's interesting is that we know animals like mice can do this. They can locate themselves almost perfectly even without vision. And that capacity has been attributed to the medial entorhinal cortex and the hippocampus, specifically grid and place cells. And what's astounding is that when the authors of the study looked at what was going on in the intermediate layers of the network, they found artificial neurons that looked astonishingly similar to those in the real brain. And so that suggests that perhaps this hexagonally tiled representation that you see that is a significant feature in biological intelligences, specifically mammals, could be a universally optimal representation for this particular problem of path navigation. So deep learning will be something we cover in this course, but it won't be the main focus. Okay, so we've said some things about the properties that we need of that black box. And so now we can start to imagine what kinds of functions that might include, and some approaches we could take to figure out that problem. So the way machine learning engineers describe the type of function they're approximating is by the task they need it performed. One such task is what's called classification. So for here, we have some example inputs, each of which is characterized by two numbers, x1 and x2. So we can plot it in a 2D scatter plot like that you see here. And then for each input, we provide a label associated with it. So the output that we want can take on values in a set, like plus or minus 1. That is, the output indicates the class to which the sample belongs. And then the idea is that once we have a system that approximates this function, we can provide a new example. For example, this gray dot here. And the system will output the right label or classify the example. In this case, it looks like it should be 1 or turn blue. And so you might see how this raises some new issues. Like getting those labels can be expensive or inconvenient, as we might not have a human, as we need a human to do that for us, or some more complicated intelligent process. Regression is similar to classification in that we still provide example inputs and outputs depicted on the horizontal and vertical axes of the scatter plot, respectively. But different in that now our outputs can take on continuous values. They're not just 0 and 1 anymore, but can take on any value to any arbitrary position. So now if we give it some new x, the task is still predicting the output, which amounts to figuring out the best place on the y-axis our prediction should go. Maybe by eyeing it, we might recognize that we could draw a single line, something like this red line, through these points and do a decent job of relating x and y and putting y on a reasonable place with the x we were given. And so in this course, we'll also encounter how to approach this problem, which will require us getting a lot more precise about what we mean by best place, as well as the math underlying how to figure out the parameters of such a line. But you might also imagine a different relationship, like this blue line within our training data set. The difference it would make to our prediction, to this specific prediction, is small, but you can see that as x gets larger, these two curves start to pull apart. So we'll get a deeper understanding of the assumptions we make about our data so we can effectively communicate the limitations of a model. So classification and regression are examples of what's called supervised learning in the field of ML, as we've provided examples of the correct behavior of the function to be approximated. Machine learning can also be unsupervised, where we do not provide the correct outputs at all. Instead, the task for the machine is to try to recognize a higher level pattern or some structure in the inputs provided. So here, for example, you might recognize that the data fall into two distinct clumps or clusters, to use the technical term. And the task of the machine learning algorithm is to provide some statements about the characteristics of those two clumps. So this is the list of topics that we'll cover. We'll go through a wide array of machine learning techniques, starting with foundational concepts and gradually progressing to more advanced topics. We begin with the early algorithms like perceptron and linear regression, and encounter tasks with both supervised and unsupervised learning within the first few weeks. We'll then dive into essential ML topics like support vector machines, kernel methods, decision trees that have been proposed a bit more recently. But then sprinkled throughout, we'll also come across general mathematical frameworks that can be applied to many algorithms, like maximum likelihood estimation, bagging, and boosting. So after the midterm break, we'll explore more advanced techniques, including expectation maximization, and neural networks, and emerging areas like graph neural networks, variational autoencoders, and general adversarial networks. Towards the end, we'll touch on cutting edge areas like flows and contrastive learning. And at the end, we'll go into ethical concerns like robustness, privacy, and fairness. So each lecture will build on the last, so it's important to stay engaged and keep up with the assignments and the lectures. So I've color-coded these to roughly correspond to 5 different categories shown on the left, but the foundations and classical ML algorithms will switch back and forth a bit. It's not a clear-cut line between those two. So the schedule might need to be adjusted. Some topics we might not have time for. I've tentatively got graph neural networks as well as contrastive learning as nice to haves, although I'm hoping we have time for them because I think they're quite important. In any case, I'll always let you know what the next lecture will be. And yeah. And so in this latter part of the course, I'm going to try to bring in outsiders that are working on these issues directly, as they are fast-changing topics. For example, one of our TAs, Saber, will be giving the lecture on privacy because that's his core research. So I like to think of this progression as, kind of start up with the basics and build confidence by learning functions directly from data. And next we'll move on to classical machine learning, where the focus shifts to learning functions from carefully designed features of the data. And so this process, referred to as feature engineering, can sometimes be tricky. And so some things will work and some others won't. We'll then take things even further and embrace neural networks to effectively learn those features for us. Um, and so, yeah, neural networks just says, why bother with feature engineering at all? You know, you could just give it the network lots of data and it'll figure out what those should be. And so after that, we'll cover modern trends where idea of what defines a function in machine learning will really need to be expanded to account for more abstract and less constrained behavior, less yeah. Lastly, we'll emphasize the critical need to consider the broader implications of AI technologies, including their reliability, safety, and societal impact. And so for the rest of this lecture, I'd like to give you some examples of how all this relates to the field, drawing from some of my own research projects. So this might spark some ideas for the graduate project. Um, so for example, so as a classification example, I was working with an embedded systems engineer, specifically working in the field of the Internet of Things, IoT, and he was quite interested in putting fall detection on a wearable, but he wanted to do fall detection at the edge. That is, he didn't want to send data to the cloud and then have the algorithm run there on the cloud and then report back. No, he wanted a wearable. He wanted an algorithm to be implemented on a wearable, so that if the person wearing the wearable fell, then they would know immediately. And so what we did is that he dug up this data set of people wearing accelerometers as well as gyroscopes, and the data set involved all these actors making a number of different falls. For example, like a trip going forward or falling backwards or slipping. There was a data set with label data of each of those cases. And so the data from these sensors was time series data, specifically 9-dimensional. And what we did was use something called state space model, which takes a window over the time series data and compresses it into a single vector representation. And it's using that vector representation that enables us to learn how to classify the signal as either a fall or not a fall or the type of fall. So down here is an example of the true of the samples associated with fall. So the spikes are when a fall actually did occur, and the blanks is the subject was not falling at the time. And this green line down here is the model's prediction about the fall state. And you can see that it lined up pretty well. There was a few that got missed, but not bad for this classification attempt. Okay, so another as a regression example, I mentioned earlier in the talk that my PhD research focused on neuroscience. And so we were, during my PhD, I was looking at a region of the mammalian hypothalamus, specifically in mice, that's associated with the stress response. So these cells here are called corticotropin-releasing hormone neurons, and they're nestled right up against the third ventricle, deep in the mammalian brain. And so we had a lot of, we equipped mice with these miniature microscopes so we could image what they were doing in real time as they freely moved about in natural behaviors. So the type of data that we would get would be these traces, specifically that reported provided a proxy of the intracellular calcium concentration. And because calcium is strongly related to firing activity in these cells, we had a measure of how active the cells were over time. But we were interested in discerning whether these cells represented information, whether they conveyed information about the environment or the animal's behavioral state. And so so what we did to answer that question was we correlated features of the animal's behavior, specifically looking at speed as well as its distance from the center of from the center of a cage to the activity of single cells. And so this plot here, for example, is the trace of speed over a 90-second window, trace of that distance from the center over the same window, and then for a single cell, its activity over that window. And so what we noticed was that as the animal moves towards the center, there are cells that increase in activity uniquely as we move into the area, into that middle. And so we were able to use regression techniques to establish that there was a statistical relationship between those two variables, suggesting that this part of the brain represents that information, which could be used to guide behavior on some time scale. So in terms of some unsupervised learning examples, we do have a project ongoing using distribution learning that is involving a shallow neural network inspired by the architecture of the fruit fly mushroom body in particular. And so fruit flies, I have to back up a little bit because fruit flies exhibit this really interesting response, really interesting behavioral response, specifically upon the presentation of a novel odor. So flies are really guided. Their behavior is most strongly influenced by their sense of smell. So whereas sounds and sights might guide the behavior of humans, for flies, it's really about the smell. And so when you present a fly with a novel odor or something that it hasn't experienced in a while, you'll get this immediate or near immediate reaction where they'll orient towards the stimulus, stop their ongoing behavior, orient towards the stimulus, and start to investigate. And so that behavioral response is tied back to a single neuron in their brain, or I think two neurons that couldn't be distinguished between. But anyways, it's called this M-BON alpha prime 3 neuron, which stands for mushroom body output neuron alpha prime 3. And so it's a really simple circuit that enables that response to happen, or that classifies an odor as novel or not novel. And specifically, so an odor first makes contact with these olfactory receptor neurons, about which information is conveyed to the projection neurons. And then there's a kind of random projection onto these Kenyan cells into the insect mushroom body. And so the weight onto this final output neuron gets strengthened or weakened, depending solely on if the Kenyan cells, the activity of these Kenyan cells. So if a Kenyan cell fires, then the output, then this output weight is weakened. And if the Kenyan cell is quiescent for quite some time, the strength of this will actually grow. And so the idea is that if you present an animal with an odor, then some of these Kenyan cells will fire, and so the associated connections will weaken. And so repeated representation of the same odor will cause this output neuron to go quiet, and so we won't get that novelty response anymore. In contrast, if an odor hasn't been seen in quite some time, Kenyan cells that haven't been active, those connections will grow, will actually get stronger. And so if that odor is suddenly presented, then those specific Kenyan cells will have a huge response. They'll have an amplified ability to trigger a spike in the output neuron. And so in that way, a novel odor or an unfamiliar odor will cause the output neuron to fire and therefore trigger the novelty response. And so what's really great about this is that we have a bounded resource system. So we have a fixed number of Kenyan cells, and then an ability to recognize novelty despite for any odor at all. And so we, inspired by this, we came up with we modeled the projection onto Kenyan cells as kind of a locally smooth embedding of the data. And then we had a very sparse projection onto a hidden layer of Kenyan cells. And then having an almost identical update rule to what's seen in the real fruit fly, we were able to not only detect novelty, but also estimate the probability of an input based solely on the current that was flowing into this output neuron. So we could refer to this as distribution learning. This was phenomenal work done in collaboration with Terry Stewart and Jeff Orchard, as well as Michael Furlong. So really, really happy to have been part of that. Another example of unsupervised learning for my research projects, something called, I guess, generation. So the idea here is that, perhaps you have a picture of a cat and you want the system to generate more pictures of cats, but you don't want it to give you dogs or trees or houses. You want cats, but you don't want them all to be exactly the same cat. You want to have a few different cats thrown in there. And so there are plenty of examples of generative AI algorithms out there, like ChatGPT. But what was missing in the literature that we noticed, this was work done in collaboration with Michael Furlong, as well as Nicole Dumont, Madeline Bartlett, Jeff Orchard, Terrence Stewart, and Chris Elias-Smith, was that these generative models aren't very biologically plausible. And so we don't, at this time in the course, I don't think you have the tools to appreciate what specifically we came up with to do that. But what we did do, and this was actually accomplished by Nicole Dumont, was implement a sampling algorithm in spiking neurons. And so this is the output over here. The gray dots were the kind of training data, and the blue dots is what our algorithm output given that training data. And so yeah, one thing I'd like to point out is that there are some topics that we'll cover in this course that just aren't the focus of my research. I've encountered them, but for these, I'll really be operating at the edge of what I'm comfortable with. So specifically, as my research focus is on the development of biologically plausible algorithms, my engagement with topics like deep networks has been more superficial. These are typically trained using backpropagation, and that's not something we think networks of real biological neurons can do. Similarly, I personally am most interested in animal behavior. And so I've done a little bit with large language models, which involve concepts like attention and transformers. But for these topics, I'll be learning alongside you. And it might be just a few lectures ahead of you when we get there. And so my focus is going to be on distilling the materials so that you have an easier time learning it than I did. Okay, so thanks everyone for tuning in, and check back for lecture number 1, which will be on the perceptron. Okay, thank you.